Welcome back to the Female Dating Strategy, the meanest only female dating podcast on the internet. I am your host, Diana.
And I'm Rose. And today we're having a lovely piece of fluff. We're discussing the new hot show that's been a hit for Netflix called Nobody Wants This. Why are we looking at this show in particular, Diana?
Well, because right now it's in the top 10 of Netflix, so everyone is watching it right now. But I think that, sometimes it's really good to do these media episodes. It's a low stakes way to check our vetting. So, when you're not actively dating, it's like, okay, I may not be able to spot the red flags in my own life, but am I able to spot the red flags in someone else's life? Can I see why I shouldn't be swayed by media? Can I see why this is definitely propaganda that I shouldn't fall for? Like, am I, falling prey to things that are being dressed up really well that aren't actually good for me? And so when I watched the show, I was like, I never watch romantic comedies. Let me just start there. Like, I have a loyalty to the rom-coms of the 2000s. And I really enjoy them, but I have to say in the last few years or so, I don't watch things that are outright rom-coms. Like, if they have a romantic element to them, but they're about something else, I'm cool with it. But if it's like a straight up rom-com, I'm just like, no, this is written by some scrote, or it's written by a woman who is definitely daydreaming. The Jane Austen of our times. No, thank you.
Well, and this is something we talked about just before we started recording, which is what I refer to as the curse of FDS. And as I've come along in this journey of feminist glorying, what I've really realized is there's no media I can consume that I don't end up immediately criticizing. And I've had to learn to be gentle with myself. It's okay, Rose, that you are watching this through a critical lens. Because as much as we want to enjoy these things, and I did, I really, almost in spite of my better judgment, I found the show utterly delightful and engrossing to watch. At the same time, I would be going through a checklist in my head of all the things I disagreed with, all of the nuances where I was like, this is so unrealistic, or don't let Adam Brody convince you that you should convert to Judaism, right? So all of these things, as we were watching, I couldn't help but sort of speculate on what I would do if I were in that sort of situation. And like you say, that's why we're discussing it today. It's a low stakes way of looking at, are we still being sharp? Are we still vetting in ways that we need to be? Are we sort of unwittingly falling prey to charm and chemistry when really we need to be looking to values and community? I mean, is that what we always should be looking for? Not necessarily. But again, these are the sorts of quandaries that we're presented with when we consume this sort of content. So that's what we're looking at today. And let's get into it.
Yep. And you know what? What better way to really test your boundaries with having someone as handsome as Adam Brody try to tell you to break them, right? They have really given us the most delicious devil to actually test our skills. So we are going to look past his pretty face and his natural charisma and his sense of humor. And we're just going to look past this millennial icon and be like, okay, what are the messages? We're going to apply some real media literacy to this particular show because we want our audience to be able to identify why certain things are just fantasy. And this show, as wonderful as it is, as great as the chemistry is between the cast, and as witty and awesome as the dialogue is, there's still a lot of things that when you actually peel underneath the surface, you can see that, it's not realistic. And it's certainly not how these things play out in real life. And so, I want to start with the baseline of media literacy is important because, speaking as a person who works in the entertainment business, we are often writing from an idealized place. When we write about our personal experiences, very often we're writing from the position of well, what if this had happened instead? For a lot of men who write these shows, it is wish fulfillment. That's why you see all these shows where these men are incredibly, for lack of a better word, they're low value scrotes, right? And they're still landing the extremely hot babe. That was what all those shows with Leah Remini were about. She was this hot babe who was married to this useless guy. This is the ultimate male fantasy. This show, on the other hand, was written by a woman. But sometimes I must let women know that just because something is written by the female gaze does not mean that that is a standard you have to apply to yourself. Because sometimes these women, let's say they polish the turd of their own lives, and they also make their lives look much better than they actually are. You never know what are the dynamics of someone beneath the surface. It's a story at the end of the day. It is a story sold to get you to believe that these kinds of things happen. And we know the reality of men. We're not talking about the fantasy of men. So for women who consume a lot of rom-com, please just, remind yourselves that what you see on screen is not what you're going to see in real life. I hate to say this, it's like telling someone that Santa Claus doesn't exist, but Santa Claus doesn't exist, okay?
It's true. Actually, it's funny because these are the same charges we lay against the romance novel, which I have been a particularly ardent fan of since probably too young of an age. But the librarians, they were my buddies. And so they let me check out whatever age inappropriate material that I wanted. Like, I think I read, just a quick aside, the Charles Manson book when I was like 9. I should not have been reading Helter Skelter when I was 9. But, none of the adults were stopping me. And it was the same with romance novels. But one thing it did teach me was that sex was supposed to be as much for the woman as for the man. And that there was nowhere else where I ever got that message. So to all romance novelists, thank you for your public service. But so many people disclaim the romance novel because it's not realistic. It's women's fantasy. Well, shit, there's every other genre is basically male fantasy. I mean, video games in a nutshell are male fantasy. And yet we're not sitting here lecturing them about that constantly.
No, but here's the thing, like, you can love problematic things. I do it all the time. You can love problematic things and just enjoy them. Just, don't apply that to your real life. Like, it's like expecting that a unicorn is going to run right by you in your relationship just because you saw it happen in a movie one time. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be able to tell the difference between things that are said for marketing and things that are written by very clever writers and things that are genuinely realistic. One of the things that really got to me about this particular story is that I found it really relatable from a person who also comes from like a very conservative culture. Like, the vast majority of people from my background, like especially amongst South Asians, I would say, we tend to marry each other. Like, the people who marry outside of the culture are the minority. So, part of the reason of that is like the preservation of our culture. But the other part of it is just the feeling of like not being understood by someone from a different culture, or the reluctance of other people to adapt to our culture. And if these are things that are important to you, like, one of the things I had a discussion with Rose about before we began the podcast was, in my view and in my experience, speaking as a person who doesn't usually, I can probably point to like 2 men in my life that I've dated who are from my culture. For the most part, I don't date men from my culture. Maybe some other day I'll get into it. But for now, most of the relationship experience I've had has been with men who are not from my culture. And I'm a person who's like a bit of a cultural anthropologist, right? I'm interested in knowing about other people. I'm interested in learning about their cultures. I'm interested in participating in their cultural rituals and like eating their food and all these other things. Like, I go all in, right, when it's a person I care about. But I always felt that it was very one-sided. And I think for most women who are in relationships with men who are not from their culture, there's a lot more effort coming from the woman to be an acceptable member of their community and to like adhere to their cultural norms to an extent where they're accepted. I see that happening more from women who really want to belong than I see from men trying to adapt. I'm not saying that there aren't men who don't learn the language and culture of their spouses, but honestly,
as a general rule.
Yeah. And the only time I've ever seen that happen really is, I'm going to say it, is with like these white guys who are into Asian women.
Yeah, the passport bros.
Yeah, or like the Japanese fetishists, you know what I mean? The ones who are like super into anime and stuff. Yes. Like, it's very creepy, their interest in the culture.
It is creepy. And this is true. In fact, this is one thing I remember feeling as I was watching this show. And I'm a very feelingful person. So like when I'm watching media, I'm feeling all the feelings, I'm not watching this from a sort of academic posturing position. I'm like, oh, that's so sweet. Or like, oh, yay, she saved the dog. I really just kind of become a child in my enthusiasm and in sort of the openness I have towards whatever media I'm consuming. One thing I really saw that bothered me the most, or that immediately stuck out to me, was both the conservative and the secular communities were both just assholes. Okay? Like, his whole family, his whole circle, just absolute utter assholes. And her whole family and circle, also assholes, but for different reasons. And so I think that's something that we need to understand, is just because somebody is religious or not, or just because somebody is more educated or not, doesn't ameliorate these differences that come from so many humans' intrinsic nature of disapproving and viewing themselves as superior to all other groups, right?
Yeah. And I'm going to start with like the first red flag that I saw in the show. Like, that is not culture related. Okay. First of all, his girlfriend wearing the ring without him proposing was incredibly weird.
Oh God.
Women, Please don't do that. I think they set it up really well in that, like, anybody who's remotely sensible is looking at that and being like, oh my God. Like, where she's like, well, it's kind of like we're already married. So there's like, you don't have to, kneel and just like do that. Like, let's just get it over with, and like, again, I think like the big red flag for him when he met, what's the character's name again? Kristen Bell's character? I forgot. But anyway,
I don't know.
Joanne's character.
Yes.
Yeah. So when he meets Joanne, he's like not even 24 hours out of a relationship. Okay. First red flag is don't get with the guy who's like the body isn't even cold yet. And it's a long-term relationship. Okay.
And Joanne even says this from the jump. She's like, I'm trying to avoid these men coming from the gray zone who aren't, completely processed and like detached from this prior relationship. You're absolutely right. It was like literally that afternoon and that evening. And I'm not saying that this doesn't happen from time to time, but this is, again, the fantastical element. This is the fantasy, right? Like, if only you break up with the person who really isn't right for you, you're immediately going to be served up on a silver platter by the universe, your soulmate.
Yep. Wishful thinking, as we like to call it. Wishful thinking. I mean, by that logic, I should have had like 10 Adam Broodys by now.
Yes, at least a handful, I would say. Come on.
At least a handful with some to spare. Throw in some Leighton Meesters there too. Like, I'm not complaining,
Yes. Oh my gosh, it's so true. But yeah, this was something that, I was not surprised by how his Jewish community was portrayed. I think, actually, this is something I wanted to tell you, Diana, was that, like, have you ever watched Fiddler on the Roof?
No, I don't think I have.
It's before our time, but as a music theater junkie, as one who performed in every musical ever that I could get my hands on, and who also just loves the music, the compositions. Actually, my older brother played Tevye. So that's where I first was introduced to it. I loved the music. I became obsessed. I ordered the piano book of the music arrangements. And since then, I've also watched the movie. And this is a script that actually has nuance and elegance and shows the complexities of Orthodox Judaism being met with modernity and the changing times. I mean, when I compare like how much more sophisticated movie musical from the 60s is to this show now, I mean, it just kind of shows, I think, the coarsening of cultural attention and attention spans in general, because Fiddler on the Roof is like a 3-hour long musical, but it doesn't feel like that. If you actually sit down, to all our listeners, I often to my adult piano students, I'm like, you need to sit and start watching some of these musicals. They are works of art, like The Sound of Music, Julie Andrews, My Fair Lady, Audrey Hepburn.
Love The Sound of Music. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, all of these are cinematic masterpieces, and they get written off because it's like, oh, it's hokey, they're singing, I don't like musicals, la, 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 la. No, the story is amazing. The acting is amazing. All of that is operating on the highest level. Then I come and I see this show, and it's like caricature almost, right? It's just the broadest strokes. And that's one of my, media lenses where I'm just like, this is the lowest common denominator for portraying sort of the stereotypical Jewish conservative mother, who's like a dragon mother, and his bumbling brother and his, iron-fisted sister-in-law. Like, honestly, why would you even want to spend time with these people if they were your actual family? All they do is hector him and browbeat him and insult him. Oh shit, I just described my own family. Okay, so now I can no, just kidding. Now I do understand how it is possible. But at a certain point, you have to understand that, like Diane and I have discussed, you are the sum total of the 5 closest people to you. How is Adam Brody absolutely so wonderful when all the people surrounding him are total dunces? Okay? It just wouldn't happen.
Yeah. I will say, though, that, I understand also from like an immigrant perspective that, in their situation, they are Russian Jews who escaped the Soviet Union. And so they may be a little bit more strict on who their going to be head rabbi's son would marry. And that was, I think, part of the reason that they picked that he would be a head rabbi. Because if he was just like your common garden Jew, that's the expression.
Yeah.
If he was just your regular matzo ball. Because, the crazy thing is, in my own family, we have plenty of Jewish in-laws. That's the crazy part. Like, I have members of my family who have married Jews and not converted. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. And it's weirdly very common for like South Asian people, like Indians especially, to marry Jewish people. I've seen so many Indo-Jewish couples because our cultures are very similar. Like, the interesting thing is, like, Chimamanda Adichie talks about this, about like stereotypes in general. And she's like, the problem with stereotypes is that not that they're untrue, but that they're incomplete. And I think that, understanding the perspective of where his family comes from. Because I think the conversation he has with his dad, in the hospital scene when his girlfriend gets hurt, you're going to have a beautiful life with this girl, but ultimately you're the one who has to live with her. So you have to determine whether this is going to make you happy or not.
Good job, Dad. By the way, I really like that portrayal of his dad in that moment. Like, that was a very tonic, masculine moment, which I approve.
Mm-hmm. So I think his dad did that without belittling any of the women.
Mm-hmm.
I think if there's anybody who's high value in this show, it's the dad. Like the loser brother, he's a loser for a reason, okay? That shit that he's doing with like the blonde sister is micro cheating. Red flag everywhere, okay? Like, thank you for telling her the truth, but also you're a terrible husband, sorry. Who gets high with his kids around? Like, I mean, they normalize this shit. Like, he's just eating edibles, eating ice cream with his kid, like sexting a teenage boy. Like, everything is so weird. So weird.
So bad. Like, he's criminal.
Sasha's a terrible, like, he's weird. Weird as hell.
He's the character I liked least. And then after that was her sister, who was just like this, like, miserable ball of cynicism. And, I know she was there as a foil, but she felt so one-dimensional to me. Like,
she is the bitter, jaded femcel. That's the character they made. They're like, she is the bitter single woman. Like, this is what happens when this woman doesn't get laid and you're single too long. Like this, they made that character to show, like, it's basically a way to reaffirm that constantly chasing men is you being a better person in some ways, because you are betting on love and she's so cynical that she doesn't want to believe in love. And like, also, I think that it's part of reaffirming what a terrible person she is, because she's actively going after a married man. So like, they're making her out to be this like, oh, these single women, they have no morals. They just go out, after married men, and like, they're jealous of their sisters who are going out with honorable rabbis. Like, it's just like Madonna whore. You know what I mean? I mean, at one point, her sister even says that to her, right? She's like, you're going to be on these desperate dating apps chasing dick, and I'm with my hot rabbi. And it's like, okay, congratulations, princess. Most rabbis don't look like Adam Brody. No rabbi. I've never met a rabbi that looks like Adam Brody. Sorry.
Actually, right now I'm teaching a rabbi's son piano lessons. And I'm not saying he's, an example of all Jewish rabbis, but Adam Brody is singular. Okay, there's a reason he's popular, even in Hollywood. Okay, he's a total dreamboat. We all stand in Adam Brody. But I haven't gotten to those episodes yet. So Diana has watched the whole season. Disclaimer, Diana has watched the whole season. Then she texted me. She's like, have you watched this? I think this would be so fun. So then I went and I watched the first 4 episodes. So I'm speaking from a perspective of someone who's seen just about half of the first season. Diana's seen the whole. So if there are any spoilers that come out, like, I'm okay with spoilers, Diana, but also to our listeners, like, just be aware that we might be discussing things that you haven't gotten to. So maybe put a bookmark in this episode and come back to it if you want to watch the whole season before, so we don't unintentionally spoil something for you.
I may have already spoiled things, so I apologize. But also, the show has been out for half a minute, and Netflix years, that's like 50 years. So you should have already watched this by now. I'm not going to apologize for that.
So true, because it's all over the internet. And that's why I first heard about it, because all my friends give me their streaming sites. So like, I have no subscriptions, but occasionally I will use them. But I hardly ever watch. I just like to read and consume YouTube. But so I was like, okay, yeah, it's been a while since I've seen a show, like a serial. Let's go and watch it. And it's like 28 minutes of perfect bonbon, right? And here's another example of like the broad caricature, the stereotype that I was so sure was going to be fulfilled. I was so sure that she was going to convert for him. I was like, a shiksa, a Gentile blonde. I don't know if anybody's ever read Philip Roth, who's like a Pulitzer-winning novelist of America. And he's a Jewish boy who has written all about, his struggles between his love for the noble Jewess, but his like even greater lust for the blonde shiksa. Like, that's basically his entire oeuvre, but it's right so beautifully, it's almost like fine. But anyway, I was so sure that she was going to convert, because I was like, there's no way a rabbi is going to end up with a shiksa and not have her convert. Like, there's no way his community, his synagogue would allow that. But Diana told me I was wrong.
Yep. I will say, it's a very common trope for men who don't come from blonde culture to fantasize about blonde women. It's a very common thing in multiple cultures. Like, I've heard this with Black men, I've heard this with Latino men, I've heard this with Asian men, I've heard this with South Asian men, I've heard this with Middle Eastern men, and I've heard this from Jewish men. And really, I mean, I'm sorry to burst the bubbles of blonde women. I'm sure you have more fun and you're obviously very beautiful. But men aren't into you just because of what you look like. Men are into you because of what you represent, which to them is power. and which to them is rebellion in certain cases in their family.
Yeah, it's the pinnacle of the hierarchy, right? For status symbol.
Yeah, which is exactly how they depicted the sisters in the show, is that him going after the blonde Shiksa was an act of rebellion against his own family. And that's why they took it so seriously, because he is effectively rejecting his culture to pick a Gentile, right? And the thing is, spoiler alert, you can mute the next 5 seconds of me saying this. But at the end of it, she doesn't convert for him. She actually breaks up with him. And he chases after her and says, "You're right, I can't have both." And then he kisses her. So it's left in a very ambiguous note where it's like, we don't know whether he gave up being head rabbi or not, or whether he's choosing her, or whether he's choosing to just not take the head rabbi position and be like a lower rabbi. We don't know. They've renewed it for a second season, so we'll have to see whether, he made that choice or not. But at least at the end of the show, it's very obvious that he chose her. So, let me just briefly go over like my positive green flags for this show. I'm happy that they casted Adam Brody. Their chemistry is wonderful. Like surprisingly, Adam Brody in this show was not the worst part of the show, right? Like outside of the fact that he moved on way too quickly, and men do that. Here's the thing, like we always talk about how men will have this forever girlfriend whose time they waste, which was obviously Rebecca. And then he dumps her for this like hot blonde thing that walks by like 5 minutes later, because again, that she's a placeholder, right? He didn't want what everybody else wanted for him. He wanted to get to choose. And it's not even that he's in a position of stability. He just knows that there's who can challenge him really? He's got like a set gig. If he gets like the head rabbi position, I assume this is like tenure for rabbis. I don't know much about the Jewish faith, but I assume you have it good. And I mean, he's in the Wilshire Temple. Man, those LA people, they have money.
They got money. Yeah, right? I know.
That temple looks nice. Okay. That's a job for life, right? So he's in a position of stability, and like one would question why he would blow it up. So my biggest red flag with him was the fact that, he moved on so quickly when he blew it up, because he didn't really give time for himself to grieve and process. And he didn't really give time to this partner who's like, she mentions it towards the end where she's like, I had this dream of being like the head rabbi's wife. Like I primed myself for this role. I was prepared for the responsibility that it entailed to be his, head rabbi wife. Are you prepared to be like the face of the temple? Because that's what you're signing up for. He's not just any common Jewish guy. He's like the head of his faith, essentially. So you become the face of the temple and you're like a sex podcaster. You know what I mean? So you have to really determine whether this is something you want. And I'm also glad that, towards the end, they didn't pit this like natural fight between the two, even though they try to like, push at that throughout the show. But at the end of the day, like both of the women are kind of obsessed with each other, and like they talk to each other in a very respectful way.
Yeah, I appreciated Joanne's forthrightness about her obsession with Rebecca. Because, of course, like almost all of the next women tend to obsess over the last girlfriend. Like social anthropologists, they feel like if they comb through enough data from that relationship, they will find the secret to what will make sure that they never end up breaking up, right? Like that's often what drives that. Also, this is a point you made earlier, but I think it bears repeating. So often when you're coming across a cultural divide, it is the woman who has to learn how to make all of the special dishes. It is the woman whose social calendar now has to revolve around his family, his holidays, his special occasions. And so rarely does the man reciprocate. It's not that it doesn't ever happen, but this is a general rule of thumb that you can trust, will probably trust and believe that that's most likely what it will end up being. Even if it isn't in the beginning, remember they're on their best behavior in the beginning. And so one of the things that I also quibbled with Adam Brody, our delicious heartthrob, was, he was like from the very beginning. And again, I know this is part of the rom-com script and sort of the tempo of a show, but from the jump, he's like, listen, I'm really all in. I really think this is something that can be da 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 da. And it's like, other than her being hot, what do you know about her? Right? Nothing, absolutely nothing. And it should have been an immediate red flag for you, a rabbi, to not only pursue a woman who was not religious, but she was a-religious.
And they try to make it seem like it's all beshert, like, oh yeah, I was meant to be with this girl. Like you just can't control who you love. But it's like he goes into this knowing that she's not Jewish. You know what I mean? And if it's this important to you, then why would you not just pick a Jew?
Exactly. Like you, not only are you not going to go for a Jewess, but you're going to go for an atheist? Like that's such a big swing. Like it's one thing if you're dating somebody who's like a devout Christian. And I've actually heard of various like marriages where one is Hindu, one is, Jewish, because again, like you say, there are cultural values that are similar across these religions. But to go from a rabbi, even of a progressive temple, like an avowed atheist, it's a big swing. But again, like this is something where if you're dating, like these are very serious considerations. I mean, I think what are the top three things, Diana? If I'm not mistaken, the top three reasons that people's relationships don't make it, like number one is money.
Finance, yep.
Finance. Number two, I think, is religion.
Yep. I think it might also be equitable distribution of labor.
And labor, right? So if we're looking at these three things, like none of these are firing on all cylinders for either of them. And so for me, what I really saw in those first 4 episodes was like, this is a whirlwind, lustful romance. You know, it's lust, it's chemistry, and it's lust. And there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely not. Like, please go and enjoy, you know, the best kiss of your life, the best sex of your life. But understand that you don't know who this person is. And all of these grand promises are based on, you know, a sandcastle.
Also, I will say this isn't the first time that a show like this has done this before. Like in Sex and the City, Charlotte gave up being a Presbyterian for Harry and ended up converting to Judaism. And it was a huge point of contention in their relationship because, you know, he kind of waited to hook her in and get her into the relationship before telling her that, like, I'm not going to marry you until you become a Jew. So he kind of dangled that carrot in front of her that was like, until you convert. But it was really a test. Here's the thing. You have to watch when it's a shit test, because with him, it was absolutely about testing her to see how far he could push her in like moving towards his point of view. Like, oh, if I can get you to convert, if I can get you to like move mountains and like, you know, jump through all these hoops to be with me, that means that you're really desperate to marry me. And so in the end, he ends up withholding the ring from her because she does all these things. She converts to Judaism. She has the Shabbat dinner. And then when she's hosting the Shabbat dinner at her house, he isn't even present in that moment. Like he says this is important to him and he's busy watching like the Super Bowl or something or like a baseball match. And she gets so frustrated. She's like, set a date, you know, and he like blows up and he's like, oh, to think I almost brought a ring. This is emotional manipulation. Okay, plain and simple. And that's the problem I have with these men who are so-called devout religious people who go after women who are completely expressly not devout. They intentionally try to see how far they can manipulate this person to change their whole ideology, because that's, again, a part of their idea of like, you know, having some control over her. Like it's about the sense of control they get from manipulating her to drop her values and adopt his.
This is absolutely 100% true, Diana. And this is something that I have actually, so I am in a major city, a major US city. I have various friends who are Jewish. I've attended Pesach and like, you know, Shana Tova with having just passed Rosh Hashanah. I've always been really fascinated by the Jewish faith because as a recovering Catholic, part of me has always been very interested in religious history and like, so how did Catholicism come to be? Well, then you have to go back to Judaism. And of course, I always ended up, some of the greatest American writers have been Jewish writers. So you've got Chaim Potok, you've got Philip Roth, Saul Bellow. I mean, the list goes on. And even some of the greatest composers as well in America are Jewish. So growing up as somebody who loved culture and then pursued it as a field of study, you cannot help but see how instrumental Jewish people have been from the jump in American cultural history. And so I've often joked, like, if I'm going to marry anybody who's religious, I would marry a Jew. They tend to be a learned people. They tend to be, you know, they appreciate community. There's a very strong sense of community values. And I also like that there's a broad spectrum of religion. Like you can be Orthodox, you can be progressive, there's Reform. There's so many, you know, spokes on the wheel where you can land, and all of it, depending on where you land, all of it's acceptable. And so I'm like, well, if I were to convert, it would be like a secular conversion. Like I would be doing it as a cultural token of goodwill. I wouldn't care about the religion per se, but, you know, like my therapist is a secular Jew, is what she calls herself. She's like, oh yeah, I don't have anything to do with the faith, but like I still observe, I still make these dishes. I still appreciate like going to the temple when somebody's having a bat mitzvah or whatever. And that's what I've always said. But again, that's coming from someone who has an extensive Christian background, who has, you know, basically a PhD in religious studies, and who has dedicated herself to understanding these and to broadening her circle in ways where I've had friends of all religions. And in the US, that's actually not that common, which is surprising to me because we are a melting pot, but it's a caste system, essentially. And so this is something where when I was seeing this rabbi go to such an extreme difference in caste, not in class, because I think they both come from money, is what I was getting from the first 4 episodes, at least, because I don't know any podcasters, Diana, who can have a successful career and live in LA only on a gig of podcasting. But again, this is all part of that fantasy that that were being sold. And so this was just something I wanted to point out, was that from what I know about the Jewish faith and the Jewish tradition, like if you're going to be at that level of religious piety, like there's just no way your temple's going to accept you marrying a blonde atheist. It just wouldn't happen. And so at least I applaud her for noting that and being realistic.
Yep. And the other red flag for me in the show was that like they were supposed to have like a weekend away, and she ended up giving up work again. Please, like, this is like the basic shit that they teach you even in like that book by Sherry Argoff, what was it, Why Men Love Bitches? Where she's like, don't start giving up your important social occasions, your important work occasions just for this man. Like she had an important meeting signed up and he decided to take her to Lake Tahoe or something for like a weekend. And then in the end, he found out that he had to be on like Jewish camp duty. And so took her to Ojai instead. And then he found out that the head rabbi was going to show up there. And he spent the entire episode hiding her away because he didn't want to have awkward questions about her background. Again, this man, like, do not be with people who are ashamed to be seen with you in public. And she gets rightfully pissed off about this. And she's like, you know what? You're treating me poorly. And like, no, fuck this. And like, but here's the thing. That is the moment you walk away. Okay. The end of that episode, like ends with like, she ends up going to her work meeting and he shows up at her work. Again, red flag. Okay. I have a work thing. Don't show up at my work thing. And he shows up and she's like, oh, you made me miss my first Shabbat. And he's like, no, we can have Shabbat wherever we want. And then they end up doing like this candle thing. And I was so pissed with him because I was like, no, okay? No, you can't do that. That's bullshit. You could have waited until after she was done with her meeting. Why did it have to be during her meeting? She has work. Her work is valuable, okay? She's not going to make much money being your wife. So let her have her little podcast, okay? If she's if she's like the call her daddy of like the Netflix world, let her be that, Again, like that's the thing with these guys, like a lot of them like to date women who are not from their culture for the novelty. They don't really see them as serious options. And like in the story, like there's always like a legitimate, sweet, wholesome excuse for why he's not able to be an available partner. And I worry that women will watch this and make these excuses for men in their lives when their men don't show up. And they say, there must be a wholesome reason why he can't show up for me. It's not because he's ashamed of being seen with me in public. It's because, he just doesn't know his feelings and he's going to show up in the middle of my work and then he's going to light a bunch of candles and it's all going to be okay. It's going to take more than the fucking candles to bring me back. You know what I mean? Jerusalem may have fallen, but I will not. So sorry.
Joshua, the walls of Jericho are not coming tumbling down, okay? Those walls are there for a reason.
Goliath is going to look like a cute little mouse compared to me.
Yes, Diana, I love your ruthless streak. Listeners, take note. I'm learning from you as well. But this is so true. And so, this is why, as I was watching it, the curse of FDS, like the media literacy lens comes into play. And it's just like, I get worked up. Like I end up feeling things I don't necessarily want to feel because I'm so susceptible.
You know what? Just to jump on one more thing. You were talking earlier about how, we were talking about how women make these sacrifices for men. Like she'll convert and she will do the Shabbat and she will go to, Jewish summer camp or whatever. When was the last time a guy was like, I'm going to go on a Real Housewives binge and like buy some skinny margaritas? No. I've never seen that happen in a TV show, okay? Where he's like, oh, I'm going to make a charcuterie board for all of your girlfriends and we're going to binge watch like, I don't know, Love Island or something. Never. Okay.
Never. Exactly. Where is the give and take? She's giving a lot. I think this also speaks to how traumatized her character really is, having been on the dating market and having been heterosexual her whole life. Although, as she says, she was much more successful as a lesbian, which I thought was amusing because, of course, that's like a shout out to how many feminists are like, including myself, like, oh, I do so well as a lesbian. But like, let's not diss our lesbian sisters by pretending like it's any easier to be a woman who is a lesbian. Okay, they have their own challenges and crosses to bear. But, she went so quickly from being cynical and I don't know if jaded, but very guarded to like, I'm going to do whatever it takes. And again, this is another red flag where like, if you're somebody who has these strong convictions and all of a sudden like quicksand, they're just slipping through your fingers, like flag the play, red flag. We got a Chinese communist parade happening here and you need to really walk away, even if it is Adam Brody.
Yeah. Again, like even with her, suddenly having the whole like, I'm going to be vulnerable and I'm just going to have, it seemed like very quick. Like we often advise women when they're dating, like the reason we focus on this whole hypergamy thing is to not go all in on one person. Like the way that the show presented it was like, when you meet the right person, you're not going to feel as guarded. You're going to want to tell them everything. Okay. There's a reason why we say that you can be vulnerable to a limit, you know? Like she disclosed that her father was gay and her mom was super emotional and that's why her father left and all this stuff like very early, right? Very, very early to this person, like before they even had their first date.
Their first date. Yeah, right.
Again, big red flag. Again, we really want people to understand that these are romantic comedies for a reason because they are preying on the idea of fantasy that this is a safe thing to do. Okay? Healthy relationships are boring. I hate to say it, but they are not this dramatic. They don't make for great TV, which is why we don't write it this way.
Right, exactly, exactly. And this is something like, you know what? I've never been healthier or happier, and my life has never looked more boring from the outside. And I don't think that's by chance, okay? I think the happiest things are the quietest things often, and those don't portray well on the big screen or the small screen, right? We want the drama of life portrayed in media. But in real life, what we want is, the unintentional joys, the small joys. We don't want the roller coasters because it's too exhausting. And we all are out here like in this economy.
Just to throw I'm speaking about this earlier than we intended, but just to throw like a random anecdote from my life and also from what I've observed of people. Like we mentioned earlier, obviously that there are like different kinds of denominations of Jewish people, right? And like I know a lot of Reform Jews. And so I think they're a little bit more flexible about marrying people outside of their culture. But generally, the common understanding was that the child would be raised in the Jewish faith. Like most of the Reform Jews I met, even if their child was like half Hindu or half Muslim or something, they were almost always raised in the Jewish faith, right? Because that was like the deal, like the unofficial contract between the two parties, which is fine because both people mutually agreed to that, their business. My personal experience with somebody who was a conservative Jew, and this is what I mean by like healthy boundaries and green flags. One of the things that I noticed about this particular individual was I could tell he was interested in me, but he was also incredibly respectful of my boundaries and space. And he had a lot of high standards for himself. For example, he didn't drink. He felt like people who drank were like just basically stupid. And he was like, I don't want to drink. I don't think there's anything in it for me. So I'm not going to do it. Even though people in our class made fun of him, even though people were like, it's a little weird that he's here when we're all drinking, he was like, I'm going to hold firm to, like, the thing is, with good people, they hold firm to their boundaries, even if it makes them like an enemy in other people's eyes. He had a very strict moral code, and he never crossed the line from friendly into romantic with me ever. I mean, obviously, because he was stone sober. Like, so he didn't have an excuse. But he was very clear about the fact that he was going to marry a Jew because he came from a conservative background. His parents divorced when he was really young. And he was really, really certain that, like, he was very honest with me about the fact that, like, he grew up in a very unstable environment where, like, the parents were, like, mudslinging at each other. And he got dragged in the middle of it. And he's like, I would never want to put my child through that. And I would never want to be in a position where I'm not able to have, like, a honest, conversation with my partner with respect. And so he generally treated everyone with a lot of respect. And in the end, he ended up marrying a Jewish girl because that was an important value to him. Even though we had like a natural chemistry and we got along really well, and he's still a good friend of mine, like he helps me out with like scripts. Like he actually just messaged me yesterday because he wanted me to look over one of his scripts. Like we have a good working relationship, but I never crossed that territory with him and he never crossed that territory with me because we both knew from the jump that it was just a non-starter. You know what I mean? And so he never crossed that territory, even though we got along really great naturally. It didn't need to be spoken out loud that he was looking for someone who came from his background. And like in an ideal scenario where that is healthy, like if a man knows that you are not up to the standards, they will not entertain you just for fun. You know what I mean? They're not going to make you a sneaky link. They're not going to make you a side chick. They're not going to make you a situationship because they are very one-track minded about the fact that they want to marry someone from this specific background that like fits whatever their ideals are. And they go and they find that person. They don't waste your time and make you a placeholder in the off chance that they meet someone better. I never became his placeholder. He always treated me as a very respectful colleague and friend. And that's why I still have respect for him. I still maintain a cordial relationship with him because he never pushed my boundaries and he never crossed any lines. Unfortunately, that shit is boring.
Right. It doesn't portray drama in a way that we have been trained as media consumers to or consider like good entertainment, right? Entertainment in general.
And I want people to consider that when they look at Adam Brody's character, because what is the first thing he does? He breaks up with this long-term girlfriend and he goes for the first thing he meets that night. That is not the move of a healthy individual.
I was just going to say, actually, you know what? And also, if he is a devout Jew or if he is a devout rabbi, there's no way he's sleeping with his intended on the first night of a date. It simply wouldn't happen. And, again, if I'm wrong, if I have the wrong kind of idea and our listeners know any better, please feel free to propose that. But from the people I know who are religious, who are religiously observant, they're not having premarital sex in that way, not so indiscriminately, not after a first date, maybe a couple months in, maybe a year in. But many I know will simply wait until they're married. And those who don't wait until they're married are still not engaging in it on the first night. And that was another big red flag I saw as far as to his character, because somebody who is at that level of religious participation, it's simply unrealistic.
And also, what was the first thing she did? I mean, once they hook up, she calls up her sister and she's like, oh, I met a man who will never want to run away. Now that's fucking weird, girl. Why are you doing that? You're still in bed with the guy. That was so strange. And it's again, she wants this validation from the people around her that men will not run away from her. And playing your cards up this front, let's see whether the two of them in real life actually work it out. But being this open with a man, again, we're very careful about what we tell men about ourselves. Okay. Once you give him the impression that you're used to being treated poorly, he knows where the bar is and he can underpay you. Okay. Think of it as employment. You don't want your company to know that you're willing to work for $1 when they're willing to offer you $5,000. If they know that they don't have to pay you anything above $1, they're not going to offer to pay you $4,999.
It's true. And let's not forget that this is also a negotiation, right? First and foremost, any and all relationship is a negotiation of preferences and desires and boundaries and taboos. All of that's in play, whether you're dealing with a corporation or you're dealing with a sister. And don't underestimate the power of not withholding, but discretion. I feel what is that? Discretion? Where is the lost art of discretion? I'm somebody who, if you met me, you would think that I'm an oversharer because I'm so friendly. People mistake friendliness for oversharing. But in fact, once you get to know me better, you realize I'm actually exceedingly private. I don't actually tell people that much about myself. But again, because of the warmth I seem to exude, because of the friendliness that I have, people overshare with me all the time because they're mirroring what they think they're seeing. And they're mistaking friendliness for openness. And I think that's a really good point in our dating worlds. We can be absolutely friendly and charming and hospitable, but we don't have to be telling them our whole life story. In fact, we shouldn't be. That should be something that comes in dribs and drabs as they earn your trust, as they prove themselves trustworthy.
Yep. I mean, at the end of the day, the oversharing and at one point he even pushes back at her and he was like, don't you think all this oversharing might be a bad thing? To be too vulnerable might be a bad thing. You have all this information out on the internet and people can pry and poke in. And she's like, oh, maybe people will just feel a lot less shame within reason. I mean, for example, the two of us are doing this podcast under a private, identity for a reason, because we can go even harder here because we know that people don't really know who we are.
Yeah.
When you're a public figure and I don't want somebody to know that someone ate spaghetti off of my left nipple or something when I was drunk in 2013. Not that this happened, just, audience beware. But I'm a storyteller, okay? Shit just comes to me.
Well, and this is something we talked about with this goes to our next point, which is actors and the rise of social media. Again, we've discussed this. I'm a Xennial. Is that what I am, Diana?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm a Xennial. And so I came up before computers had internet. It was a dial-up access. And I didn't even have a cell phone until I think I was 28. And so I come from an era where all of our foibles and all of our adventures were pre-social media. They were pre-internet. Nothing was gathered for posterity unless you had a disposable camera that you bought for fun for homecoming, And that's why I have a photo album, because the photos that I did take were important because they were the only ones I had of that era. And contrast that to how many thousands of photos you have on your phone that will probably disappear when your phone dies one day. Nobody's printing them off and making photo albums these days. Or if they are, they tend to be lifestyle gurus. Okay. It's not the norm anymore. All this is to say, with watching these two actors, I had two distinct experiences, and I talked about this with Diana as well before. Adam Brody, adorable. We're basically the same age. So I grew up with him and Kristen Bell sort of as peers, so to speak. And I've known him since, I think we mentioned this, the Gilmore Girls, when he was Lainey's boyfriend and the most adorable boyfriend ever. And then the OC, of course. And what I realized is watching him, he's so winning. He's got such a wonderful, like whimsical nature to him. I also realized I know absolutely nothing about his private life other than that he's married to the OG Gossip Girl, Leighton Meester. On the other hand, Kristen Bell, I've always had a hard time with because I know way more about her than I've ever wanted to know. And that's because she's somebody who compulsively overshares on social media.
Mm-hmm. And she's got like a very low value man too.
Oh, their marriage just seems like it's toxic. It's just like, can you just throw in the towel already? It's not supposed to be so hard from what they portray it as again.
And she puts way more effort. Like, do you own a mirror? Like, do you actually own one in your house? Do you know that you're Kristen Bell? Because I think you should go back and tell yourself that you're Kristen motherfucking Bell and get rid of this man, you know? Because like, I heard that she asked him out. I heard that like she proposed to him or something. And like, again, it comes back to the show where she's like, I'm afraid that a man can't handle me because my dad left my mom because she was emotional. The reason she acted that line so well is I wonder if that part is true. You know what I mean? I think that she thinks on some level that like men can't handle her because of how naturally witty she is. And I mean, she has like this tendency to play assholes in her show, but she's a very likable asshole. Like that being said.
Absolutely.
She's got like a natural charm and that's why people keep watching her. Like I loved her on The Good Place.
She's compulsively watchable. And this is why I feel conflicted about her because even though from what I've learned about her unwillingly, she's not a human being that I'm a fan of. As an actress, she is so winning. I mean, she is a phenomenal actress. She's a phenomenal singer. Everything she touches turns to gold in Hollywood. I mean, look at Frozen, for Christ's sakes. Like, that's a whole generation of kids who will grow up eternally worshiping her for one song alone.
And technically, she's the OG Gossip Girl because she was the voice of Gossip Girl.
That's right. Yeah. So she was the Nancy Drew of our times, right? As Veronica Mars. And so I just think, this is somebody who, when I'm watching, I have a harder time divorcing her from who she is as a person because I know way too much about her, which speaks to actually the point we just made, which is no need to overshare. Like, you get to keep your privacy, keep your dignity. Who you are is only to be shared with a select few of an inner circle that is cultivated with time and discernment. And the way she was with him, like you said, I found that such a turnoff when she leaned across, like after they just had sex, their post-coitus, she leans across his chest and is announcing what she's writing to her sister, which is the most cringe message I think I've ever heard in my life.
I thought she FaceTimed her. I thought she called her.
Oh my God, did she call her? Oh God.
I don't know. I feel like that was much worse. I will say like the top two funny moments of the show for me were one when like she's like looking up the taco place on her phone and she has like the girlfriend's name like all over her search. I was like, oh my God, that would totally happen to me. And like the other part was, when the two of the sisters are in the car and she's like, oh, he doesn't look that Jewish. And like the brother goes, oh, do we not look like we could control the media? I was dead. I was laughing so
hard. That was a very funny moment. Again, I think it's a really well done show, but as FDS girlies, this is something that we wanted to bring to your attention and to start a discussion around it, because I think we have such a valuable perspective when we look at media, and I want us to share it with one another. And let's bring up the last great divide, one of the biggest cultural divides that Hollywood itself has perpetuated, Diana. And what is that?
The Great Wall of Bullshit.
Bullshit. AKA hitting the wall at 30.
Mm-hmm. Both of these actors are 44.
Kristen Bell, you've never been hotter. I mean, she's always been a very attractive person, obviously, but I feel like her mature beauty is it's such a striking and unique beauty. All this is to say, the actresses that I tend to like are like the exotic, the voluptuous, the Catherine Zeta-Jones or Angelina Jolie, or I've always wanted to know Aishwarya Rai, like the most beautiful woman in the history of women ever, I swear to God.
I mean, she's going through a really messy divorce now. We should talk about that some other day, but like her relationship is something we should study too, because for a woman so beautiful, she's settled hard and she's really suffering for it now. But like another time. Oh
my God, that makes me really excited because I remember when I read about her marriage, I was like, no, she's settled. No. So I'm actually happy to hear she's divorcing, but I bet it's just a shit show. Oh my God.
Yeah. I'm not sure if she's divorcing, but she's separated.
I wish she would. Anyway, that should be a whole other episode. Let's come back to that. But so all this is to say, like, Kristen Bell, I am somebody who not typically is a fan of like the blonde beauties, but even I have to say, like, her look now, she's never looked better. And I love seeing that because, like you say, they're both mid-40s. And we've been told so long, and especially on the internet, the rise of like, internet bros, the passport bros, like, oh, your eggs are drying up, like, oh, women's value expires at 30, men age like fine wine. do you see all the work women put into themselves starting young? There's no way that men are aging like fine wine when they can't even like fucking file their own nails, okay? And they come in with their nasty ass sharp nails and they finger you and give you UTIs, okay? You're not the one aging like fine wine. We are. And so I'm really happy to see like, wow, how many shows have we seen where women are like in their 40s or beyond and they're ending up in a romantic relationship with a man of their own age?
Very rarely. And that being said, like I think I mentioned earlier that like I really love 2000s rom-coms. Like I have a soft spot for them because I saw them when I was a kid. But when I was a kid, I really couldn't tell the difference between someone in their 30s and 40s. To me, that was just old. You know what I mean? When you're a child, like anybody who's 30 plus is an old person.
Yeah, they're an adult. They're a proper adult.
Yeah. So like for me, rom-coms were really about adult people falling in love. Like the teenage thing never really appealed to me beyond Mean Girls and like Cinderella Story because I was a hardcore Hilary Duff fan. But in general, I always skewed older with rom-coms. And I do think the future is a little bit older. I think that now more millennials are entering the industry. We might see some like change in norms of like the kinds of love stories that are told in Hollywood, because I think people have had like enough of like To All the Boys I Loved Before High School romance thing, because it's changed a lot. I mean, also the romantic landscape has changed a lot. I don't know that Gen Z is nearly as invested as in this as like millennials still are, because I think part of the reason the show is so successful is because it had two millennial icons, you know? I don't think it would have done that well with like the Gen Z equivalent of like, I don't know who the Gen Z, like Zendaya and Timothy Chalamet doing this love story.
Absolutely.
It works because like their experience and like them being older, like we turn to rom-coms for hope. And we turn to romance books for hope. And it's very easy to feel hopeful in love when you're young. And I think that's the part of the appeal of like the love stories when you're older, is that we cling on to the hope. But I want people to understand that it's not just a hope. Men will say whatever they can because, again, it's easier to get you to lower your standards than get them to raise theirs.
Oh my gosh. Everything you're saying is like, I'm quiet because I'm listening with such intensity, Diana. I'm listening with such close attention because every word you're saying is like a precious pearl of wisdom. This is so true. I need to hear it as much as our listeners do, because it's so easy to feel like we've all heard the story that like you expire, your eggs shrivel up. Like what value are you if you don't have, a childbearing womb? Listen, we've mentioned this before, the purse or the nurse. Men will die still pursuing women. They will be on their deathbed. They will still be trying to land a woman because our value is priceless to what we bring to their lives. Now, we have to have the same approach where unless they're bringing a priceless value to ours, we simply won't even entertain it.
Yep. You need to carry yourself with the energy that like if an atheist man saw you, he would start believing in God again. And if a God-fearing man saw you, he would abandon all religion and follow your cult instead. Okay? That's the energy they need to come with. You are their one true religion and God, and everything else is just shallow and false. Sorry.
I love it. It's so true. Actually, I got to share a quick little story. One of my new piano students, he's a young fellow. I think he's maybe 8 or 9. He's still such a young child, a young baby. But what I've noticed is like when I first come in the door and when I'm leaving, the look on his face is of such pure, unadulterated glee and delight. And he's always trying to play like, oh, I don't care. And like nothing really phases me. And, like he's trying to portray this sort of masculinity that he thinks he's supposed to be embodying as a young boy. But he cannot conceal how happy he is to see me when I get there. And I tell you, I'm like, you know what, Rose, you need to put a pin in this and realize like, this is how whatever you end up with, this is the face you need to expect from the man who loves you as well.
Yep. I will say, like, one of the women that appealed to me in the show, even though they try to portray her as such a shrew as Esther, because of course she's loyal to her BFF. Like, why would she just ditch her best friend for this random blonde woman that turned up, And I kind of loved how terrified Sasha was of her. I was like, yeah, you should be a little scared. She's very hot. Like, she's intimidatingly good looking.
Oh my gosh. I know they tried to make her like an unlikable character, but as like an FDS girly, I was like, absolutely, she's loyal to her. She's loyal to her best friend. She's still respectful of her brother-in-law, but like her priorities are clearly what matter to her. And she's not going to fudge on them just because, he's lusting after somebody who he thinks could be the one. So Esther, we salute you. As we wrap up this episode, Diana, do we have any other anecdotes or thoughts we want to share before we conclude?
Yes, I will say, these days it's becoming much more common than it used to be to marry people from different cultures. if there's any last thing I want to leave women with is, if you are going to date and marry someone from a different culture, please make sure that they're putting in just as much effort to get to know your culture as you are theirs. It's very essential you do this because these things shouldn't be one-sided. He doesn't respect your culture because he expects someone who's going to stand there and just fawn at him. So don't be sitting there fawning him. You should have some pride in your own background or whatever. Maybe you don't like your culture because it's misogynistic or whatever. Which culture isn't? But at the end of the day, like, he should be making an effort to understand your cultural nuances because, there is some truth to your marrying into a family and he is marrying into yours. And it's very important that both of these things can be reconciled. So, I would say that as fun as this was to watch, and I enjoy a lot of problematic things that I can personally critique, as fun as it was, there were a lot of red flags. And this is not a strategy, okay? Please don't use this as an FDS strategy. Were there some high value behaviors and green flags? Sure. But overwhelmingly, no. This was unrealistic.
Non-FDS approved. In fact, we will officially declare it FDS disapproved.
Disapproved.
Oh, Diana, I'm so happy to have you back. We had a bit of an illness. We had a bit of a hiccup the last couple of weeks, but it sounds like you're back and better than ever. And I'm very grateful for it because I was just thinking, are they going to be upset that we've, have had a little bit of a break here in the middle of getting started? But I feel like we've been able to maintain a good level of output, and that's something that we are very much committed to.
I'm sure they'll be fine. I'm back with a vengeance, and absence only makes the heart grow fonder.
I know that's true of me for you. That's absolutely right. Oh, wonderful. At this, we'll wrap it up for today. And Diana, what is our message of every week?
Scroats, die mad.
Die mad!
Girls, expect better for yourselves.
As a matter of fact, demand better. Point blank, period. And with that, we bid you adieu.
Bye-bye.